What's up? Welcome back to episode 11 of Hike and Spike, the football podcast that stops the clock and gives you coverage on the latest NFL news, trends, and games. In this episode, we're going to be doing our very first 2021 NFL mock draft as we are in the NFL offseason and don't have much to focus on for the next 2 months. So, Andy, introduce our main segment.
Yep, this is just going to be our first mock draft, and we're just going to do the first round. I think for all of our mock drafts, we'll just do the first round. But we will we'll make more, after the combine happens, because I'll definitely change some things, and also like right before the draft. And also there will be no trades in this mock draft, just because we don't have like the membership or whatever to do the trades, and it just makes it a bit more complicated anyway. So Aki, go ahead and choose the first pick.
The first selection is owned by the Jaguars. After going 1-15 this season, they didn't really have too much to look forward to, but they did have a couple of players who showed promise, including players like James Robinson. They need help, honestly, anywhere. They need a quarterback. They need wide receivers. They need help on defense. But there is one prospect in this draft who stands out amongst the rest. This is a very easy pick for them. They shouldn't trade out of it. Many people are calling him a generational talent and is the clear number one quarterback. He was the number one quarterback in our rankings also. So the Jags will go with Trevor Lawrence.
All right, the next pick is the Jets, and they could have had Trevor Lawrence if they just didn't win any games, but instead they have the number 2 pick, and I do believe that they should trade out of it because there's just so many positions they need. But because there are no trades in this draft, I'm just going to give them a quarterback because I think that's their biggest need. And it's between Zach Wilson and Justin Fields. Even though we all ranked Justin Fields as higher in our quarterback rankings, I'm actually going to have them taking Zach Wilson. I just think it makes more sense for the Jets because they don't actually have like that much of a run game, and Justin Fields is more like a kind of a rushing quarterback. And also they do have the 49. They did get the 49ers offensive coordinator or as their offensive coordinator, and he's like worked with Jimmy Garoppolo, and I think Zach Wilson is more similar to Jimmy G than Justin Fields is.
The third pick goes to the Miami Dolphins. They actually received this pick in a trade with the Houston Texans for Laremy Tunsil a couple years ago, but it was a bad trade for the Texans because this is a third overall pick, and that's way more valuable than Laremy Tunsil. But anyways, I have the Dolphins going with Penei Sewell from Oregon, an offensive tackle. This is a great pick for the Dolphins because offensive tackles are a very good long-term investment, especially with a new quarterback like Tua. Getting a good offensive tackle will provide a very good support framework, and it's just going to set up Tua for a lot of success. The Dolphins could potentially go with the wide receiver like Jamar Chase or Jalen Waddle, but I think having an offensive tackle like Penei Sewell at third overall is probably the best value since there are good wide receivers in future rounds.
With the fourth pick, the Atlanta Falcons had once again a disappointing season, and they ended up tied with a bunch of teams, but lucky enough to break that tie, ending up with the fourth pick instead of, for some teams, I think like the 7th pick. So they have a lot of needs, but their needs aren't really on offense. Some people think that they should take a quarterback, but considering Matt Ryan is really talented and they have a 4th overall pick, this is not the time to take a quarterback. They should help their defense, which is struggle city. They've blown several leads because of their defense. Their corners have gotten burnt. And I think that because of that, they need new corners, top corners. There's 2 which are clearly at the top of this draft. I personally have Patrick Surtain ranked a little bit above Caleb Farley, especially considering the competition he faced and his production. So I have the Falcons taking Patrick Surtain.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting pick. I think if they were to go that route, they would probably consider a trade down with the Panthers, who would probably want to take someone like Justin Fields. But next up, we have the Bengals. And I think what they really need to do now is give Joe Burrow a weapon because AJ Green is obviously aging, and I think he may actually leave. And even though Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins are decent, they don't really have any type of third option. So I think the best player to give them is going to be LSU's Jamar Chase because obviously Joe Burrow is from LSU, so they actually have played together before. So I think it just makes a lot of sense for them to go with Jamar Chase.
Next pick goes to the Philadelphia Eagles. They have a lot of positional needs, especially after trading Carson Wentz, having a very lacking receiving core, and their defense also wasn't that great this year. But ultimately, I went with Kyle Pitts, a tight end from Florida. This may come as a surprise because he's a tight end, but another thing to note is that Zach Ertz may be leaving this year, and Dallas Goedert also may have some struggles with the teams. And I think having a tight end like Kyle Pitts is very valuable, especially considering he's athletic enough to be a wide receiver. He's 6'6", 240 pounds, one of the best prospects in the whole draft. I think he can provide a very big boost to the lacking Eagles offense.
That's a bit of a surprise having Kyle Pitts to the Eagles here. As we move on to the 7th pick, the Detroit Lions. Now, Detroit Lions offense supposed to be very good, but then they literally lost or going to lose everybody this offseason. They already traded their quarterback for Jared Goff, and they really need help on the offensive end. So their wide receivers are going to be leaving in free agency. A couple of them have already publicly said because Stafford got traded, they don't want to play there anymore. So I have them taking the reigning Heisman winner, Devonta Smith, because just pure talent and most recent in comparison to Jalen Waddle, who was really good last year. I take this year, and especially considering not Tua, but Mac Jones, who even though he's good, he's not Tua. I'd still take Devonta Smith over Jalen Waddle.
All right, with the next pick, we have the Panthers, and I actually have them taking the top player that is still on the board right now, and that is Justin Fields. I think this would be an absolute steal for the Panthers. I know many people expect Justin Fields to go like even second overall, so I think this is a great pick for them. They have an incredible selection of weapons at wide receiver and running back, but they just don't have a great quarterback to throw to them, so I think Justin Fields would be perfect fit.
Next pick goes to the Denver Broncos. They also have a lot of positional needs, but I decided to focus on the corner position because there aren't as many good corners in later rounds of this draft, and they also have a lot of good corners available right now. And that's why I went with Caleb Farley, a corner from Virginia Tech. He's probably the best corner available on the board, as most big boards agree on. And he's very tall. He's around 6'2". He's also very athletic. I think it's a great pick for the Denver Broncos because if you look at their cornerback position right now, the corners that they have right now are just not that good. And they actually released their best corner, AJ Boye, very recently. And their corners are also going to have their contract expire soon. So it makes a lot of sense for them to pick a corner right now.
The 10th overall selection is the Dallas Cowboys. They need a lot of help from last year, but it isn't as bad as it seems. They should have a Dak Prescott returning unless management extremely screws up. So considering you have a really quality quarterback, really quality running back, you need protection. You saw how Dak went down, terrible freak injury. You don't want him to get injured. He is your best asset. And similar to the Tua situation, just get an offensive tackle. Your offensive tackles are aging, and they are still really decent, but they're injured all the time. So it's just better if you just get protection while you can. There's two remaining offensive tackles who are among the top 3, top 4 offensive tackles in the draft, Rashawn Slater and Christian Darrisaw. But I think based off of a little tape which I've watched of these offensive tackles, my personal preference is actually the one who's ranked a bit lower, Christian Darrisaw. I think he just has provided better protection, has been in better in big game situations, and Northwestern's best assets were often on the defensive side, as seen by, I think they held Clemson or Alabama to very few points, 20-ish.
All right, the next pick is my favorite team, the New York Giants. And there was actually a lot of talk about maybe they're going to take an edge or a linebacker, but our defense was actually really good last year, so I don't see any reason we would do that. Instead, I'm going to give us a weapon, and that is the final top 3 receiver on the board, Jalen Waddle. We have like a few decent receivers, but none of them is a true number 1. whereas I think Jalen Waddle definitely has the potential to be that for us. So I think it would be a great pick.
Next pick goes to the San Francisco 49ers. It's unfortunate to see them only go 6-10 after a Super Bowl run, but at least they have a good draft pick. And at 12th, I have them going with a corner, and I'm going to say a corner in just a second, but some of the other positional needs are a quarterback, which they could potentially upgrade from Jimmy G, or an offensive tackle if they don't sign Trent Williams. But the reason why I went with the corner is because it's a very big positional need compared to these two other positions. The 49ers had a lot of injured corners this season. Jason Verrett, who's one of their best corners, is going to be a free agent, and Richard Sherman will probably leave because his contract is extremely expensive, and the 49ers just don't have the cap space. That's why I went with J.C. Horn, who I believe is the next best corner on the big board. He's a corner from South Carolina, and he was teammates with Deebo Samuel. Maybe that might help him come to the 49ers and just have better teamwork there. But he's 6'1", he's 240 pounds, just extremely athletic, and a great corner for the 49ers.
And we have our first major slide up. I think he was ranked in the 20s, moving all the way up to number 12. As we go to the 13th selection, the Los Angeles Chargers. So the Los Angeles Chargers, honestly, are a really, really solid team, especially on the offensive end. They went 7-9, and they beat many quality opponents, and they were hanging in, having big leads against really good opponents also. And I think they have a really good offense set up for the future. However, their defense, on the other hand, still has a lot of things that they need to work on, and they need leaders on the defensive side. There are players who they got. They have good corners, but they still need some more help in the front, besides Joey Bosa in the front seven and their linebackers. So there's two linebackers who are at the top. There's Micah Parsons, who at one point was ranked at like a number 5 player. And there's Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah from Notre Dame. And this is going to be a huge shocker, considering Micah Parsons is falling down because he has attitude issues and he isn't a good leader. I think the Chargers, being the young team that they are, should go with Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah for a couple of reasons. First, he plays really well. He can play on the line, and he can play as like a traditional linebacker also. And he has a lot of flexibility and played extremely well against Clemson both times that he faced them in their first win against the Clemson when Trevor Lawrence wasn't playing, and their second loss in the playoffs. He completely stuffed Travis Etienne multiple times throughout both games. And I just think that the potential you see out of a guy like Owusu-Koramoah is something which you don't see very often. I think the Chargers would love to take Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah.
And next up, we have the Minnesota Vikings. And really what I think they need is help all the way across the whole offensive line, both in the interior and at tackle. So I think the right thing for them to do is take someone who can actually play both. That is Rashawn Slater. Even though he's listed as a tackle, he does also profile very well as a guard. So I think he would be a great fit for the Vikings.
Next pick goes to the Patriots. They also played pretty well last season, but they did not play well this like 2 seasons ago, but they didn't play well this season. And at 15, I have them taking a quarterback. Specifically, I'm taking Mac Jones here. Patriots have a lot of positional needs. You know, they need a good linebacker because Dante Hightower is probably going to opt out again. They need good wide receivers because their core is just not good. Julian Edelman's very old, and their young wide receivers are just not playing well. They also need a better D-line player because they have a lot of free agents coming up. So I have them going with the quarterback because they have a pretty good selection of quarterbacks at this spot. And it's also probably the biggest need because the quarterback practically controls the offense because the ball goes through the quarterback on every play. And the Patriots defense is already decent. This might be a little bit early for Mac Jones, but compared to some of the other quarterbacks like Trey Lance, I feel like he fits the Patriot system the best. He may not be the most athletic quarterback, but he's very smart like Tom Brady. I feel like he's very similar to Tom Brady in many aspects. He's good at throwing the ball deep. He has a very good passer vision. He has a lot of IQ for on the field. So I think Bill Belichick is going to go ahead and draft him at this spot. I think it makes a lot of sense for the Patriots to take Mac Jones.
And according to this rank, this actually had him as the 33rd player in the draft. So that would be outside the first round, but he's going all the way at 15. So now next we have the Arizona Cardinals. Arizona Cardinals had a disappointing end to their season. They looked like a playoff lock early on, even leading the best division in football, but then they sort of fell apart the last half of the season. And a lot of it was due to, I guess, both their offensive tackles and offensive line and their defense. So here I have them improving their defense. I think Kyler Murray is fast. He can run away when he's getting pressure off the edge. So their defense has places to improve. So I have them going with one of the most violent edge threats I've seen in this draft class, Kwity Paye. Normally these edge threats go way earlier. I mean, you could just look at where Nick Bosa got drafted and like players like Chase Young last year. But Kwity Paye, he may not be a Chase Young, but he's definitely really, really solid and has the technique and the physical ability to be a really dominant player in the league for a while. So I think the Cardinals getting him would improve their defense amazingly.
All right, next up we have the Raiders, and I think it's pretty obvious that they need help pretty much everywhere across their defense because in general it's just terrible. But I think the best defensive player left on the board is Micah Parsons. Obviously, he did have those problems with his character and things like that. He's still a supremely talented player. He can rush the passer, which is something that the Raiders definitely need help at, and he's decent in coverage as well. So I think he should go to the Raiders.
Next pick goes to the Miami Dolphins. They had a great season this year, but they made a lot of trades and they ended up getting the 18th overall pick. And I have them taking Najee Harris. That may come as a surprise because he may not be the best prospect on most big boards, but I think the running back position is a very big positional need for the Dolphins. Their defense was pretty good. They actually had one of the best secondaries with Xavier Howard leading the entire NFL with interceptions. They also had great players like Byron Jones. Their offense was actually pretty good too. Their wide receivers played very well, and their young wide receivers are developing into great players. They may need to upgrade at Tua, and there were some doubts there, but I think it's too early to bail on Tua. I think he still played pretty well, and I think people are being too hard on him just because Justin Herbert played well. But the main fault in the Dolphins' offense is their run game. They had a lot of problems with the run game. Myles Gaskin played pretty well when he was there, but he was like a new running back. He was like his first time starting, and I don't think the Dolphins can really rely on that, especially because he was injured for most of the year, which is why I think the Dolphins need to take a new running back. Personally, I think Najee Harris is the best running back on the big board, and this website agrees with them too, so I'm going to have to go with Najee Harris.
Definitely going to be interesting to see that Gaskin-Harris backfield in Miami. But we move on to the Washington football team, the first of the playoff teams that we have. They barely snuck into the playoffs with a losing record, and they relied on a quarterback no one has ever heard of to try to beat Tom Brady, and they honestly got pretty darn close. They were closer than the Chiefs, at least, which is saying something. But you have the Washington football team, amazing defense, Alex Smith comeback player of the year, but I think that's where it ends. Alex Smith probably doesn't have much left in him. He even got injured for the playoff game. There's not a lot of hope for the quarterback position, but the Washington football team is a young team who's only looking forward. They have an amazing running back core. They probably could use maybe one more wide receiver beyond Terry McLaurin, who's really good, but having a dominant quarterback would just make this team a playoff lock, especially in the worst division in football. There's one left out of the top 5 quarterbacks who everybody agrees on, except for me. I actually have a different person at 5, but I think considering it's the Washington football team, they'll be taking based on talent. It is Trey Lance.
All right, next we have the Bears, and they could look to take a quarterback here in the real draft, but all of the top 5 quarterbacks are off the board already, so I don't think they would consider taking Kyle Trask. But aside from that, they need help pretty much everywhere on the offensive side of the ball, except for at running back, where they have David Montgomery and Tariq Cohen. But I think they're going to go with an offensive line here, and that's going to be Sam Cosmi. Now, he's going to be a bit of a project for them because he isn't super technically gifted yet, but he is like 6'7" and he's incredibly athletic. So I think he could develop into being an amazing starting tackle.
The next pick goes to the Indianapolis Colts. As we all know, they recently traded for Carson Wentz, but they still maintain their first round pick. They traded their second and third round picks, but it may become a first round pick in a future draft depending on how well they do this season. But ultimately, I had them going with an offensive lineman. Specifically, I have them going with Wyatt Davis, who is an offensive guard in college, but I think he can easily slide in and play the offensive tackle position, specifically the left tackle spot, because Anthony Castonzo recently retired. He's one of the best tackles in the whole league and one of the reasons why the Colts run game was so good. So I think that's an immediate priority for the Colts. There are some decent free agents out there like Trent Williams, Russell Okung, and Jason Peters, for example, but those guys are a little bit old and they're also going to be very expensive because they've been historically good. So I think that drafting a young tackle is the most cheap option. It's also the most viable option in the long run because he can play on your team for a long time and he's also very young.
This one had him ranked in the 40s, so this is kind of a big jump. But we go to the Tennessee Titans. They ended up winning their division, but losing to Lamar Jackson in the playoffs. And honestly, a big reason for that is their defense. Their offense is really solid. I mean, if you have Derrick Henry, your offense is pretty much set, especially considering what they did last year with drafting more O-line in the first round to help Derrick Henry just feast, and he ended up getting 2,000 yards. So their biggest needs are on the defensive end. They were a decent defensive team not last year, the year before, but last year they sort of collapsed. And I think they need a lot more pressure off the edge. And one of the biggest edge threats, who hasn't been picked yet, is Joseph Osai. Joseph Osai is really talented Texan defensive edge, and he's athletic. He's a bit of a project player also. I mean, sort of what do you expect from a lot of these edge rushers? But Joseph Osai has made some big time plays. He had some strip sacks. He's had some forced fumbles from really good running backs. So I think it just has to be Joseph Osai here.
All right, now we have the Jets. And if you remember early in this draft, I had them taking Zach Wilson. But even though Zach Wilson's a great player, he's not going to be very effective if he doesn't have anyone to throw to besides like Jameson Crowder. So I think the best thing for the Jets to do is to give him a weapon in Rashad Bateman. He's pretty his film is pretty much incredible. Like he can catch amazing catches and he's a decent route runner as well. I think the only thing that's keeping him out of like the top 3 receiver conversation is his speed. But apart from that, he does pretty much everything else really well.
Pick goes to the Pittsburgh Steelers. They had a pretty good season this year, but unfortunately they fell short in the playoffs. They have a good amount of positional needs, but I think drafting a running back is the smartest spot here because their defense is already pretty good. Their O-line is also decent, but their running back is really where their offense was lacking because their passing game was really good. James Conner he's okay. He had a good season 2 years ago, but running backs are usually only in their prime for the first few years of their career. And also, James Conner just wasn't that good last season. He wasn't as explosive, and his efficiency definitely declined. The Steelers do have Benny Snell. He's very young, but his efficiency is just not there. He's only averaging 3.3 yards per carry. I think the Steelers need to go with the running back that can significantly improve their offense because it's going to provide a very big run threat. And now teams have to, on defense, have to decide whether they want to put more players up front to stop the run game or in the back to guard the really good passing game. So I think going with Travis Etienne of Clemson is the best choice. He's the best running back on the board for a while in most big boards, and he's just a really good, explosive, and athletic player.
Next, we have the Jacksonville Jaguars, who got this pick in a trade. They already got their quarterback for the foreseeable future with Trevor Lawrence. Now they need to protect him. So it's pretty obvious, just get an offensive lineman. I think that having a guy like there's some offensive tackles who are a bit below, probably would be a bit more of a positional fit. But just getting a player who some people honestly have going in the top 10 picks because of his skill. He has a lot more technique than a lot of the other offensive linemen in this draft. Yes, I'm talking about the number one person remaining on this predictive board, Elijah Vera Tucker, going to the Jaguars to help out Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great pick for them. I think like Elijah Vera Tucker has played some tackle in the past, so I think he wouldn't have any problem making that shift. But next we have the Browns, and they have an incredible offense with their run game and some decent weapons as well. So I think they should go with a defensive player here. And I think even though they have Myles Garrett, the Browns still were barely average in terms of the pass rush, which kind of shows how bad some of his teammates were. So I think they should go with another edge rusher to play opposite from Myles Garrett, and that's going to be Jalen Phillips. I know a lot of people would probably take Gregory Rousseau here instead of Phillips, but I think Rousseau is just too kind of underdeveloped, and also he profiles more as like a 3-4 defensive end, whereas Jalen Phillips is more of a pure edge, which makes more sense with the Browns 4-3 scheme.
Next pick goes to the Ravens. They have a lot of positional needs. Once again, I mean, I guess every team has a lot of positional needs, but I think that the offensive line position is probably the most important for the Ravens because offensive line are basically the structure of the entire offense. And with the team like the Ravens that rely a lot on their run game, having offensive linemen is just really important. You need to protect Lamar Jackson and you need to protect your running backs. That's why I have them going with Trey Smith, an offensive guard from Tennessee. I think that if you watch the tape, in addition to being a very good blocker, he's also really athletic, kind of like the Jets offensive tackle from last season. I forgot the specific name, but the Jets drafted this really athletic offensive tackle last year. And I think that Trey Smith is very similar to that person in many respects. So I think with Ronnie Stanley being injured and Orlando Brown potentially wanting a trade, it's just the most sensible pick to take Trey Smith at this spot.
All right, now we have the Saints. The Saints are a very interesting team going forward. They likely won't be as good as they have been the dominant force of the past decade, especially considering Drew Brees is likely to retire. Many people would have, if there is any remaining of the top few quarterbacks, them taking a replacement, but I think Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill will be just fine, at least for this season. This will probably be a sort of rebuilding middle of the pack season for the Saints. But although they do have a really good defense, they have a good defensive line and they have a good cornerback situation, especially. They probably have some of the best corners in the entire league. They could use a bit of help at the linebacker position, especially considering their upcoming free agents, cap situation, and even the quality of their current linebackers this season. So I have them taken based on the top prospect on the board, Zaven Collins. A lot of flexibility at the linebacker position. I view him as someone very similar to a Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, except just a little bit worse at everything. But he has the flexibility like Owusu-Koramoah, which Micah Parsons doesn't have, as I mentioned earlier. I think that Zaven Collins would be a pretty good pick, and I think the Saints staff, considering their quality, will be able to develop him effectively.
All right, next we have the Green Bay Packers, and even though their offense is one of the best in the league, they still don't have really any good receivers besides Devontae Adams. Like MVS MVS is okay, I guess, and Alan Lazard is who I was trying to think of earlier also. But I think they should go with a receiver here, and that's Terrace Marshall Jr. Now he does have a few flaws in his game still, but I think overall he's still those can be fixed fairly quickly, and he'll be able to be a good wide receiver too. He doesn't have to necessarily be the main target for Aaron Rodgers because that's Devontae Adams, obviously. But as a number 2 option, I think he'd be perfect.
Next pick goes to the Buffalo Bills. I have them taking a defensive lineman here because there's just a lot of value at this spot, especially considering Gregory Rousseau still on the big board. A lot of big boards have him in the mid-10s. I have him there too. I think getting him at 30th is an absolute steal for Buffalo. The edge rushing position is also a big need because the Bills' defensive ends are just aging, and They played pretty well against some other teams, but I think Miami's probably going to upgrade their offensive line, and it would be good to get an edge on them. Get it? But I think it just makes a lot of sense because if you look at what the 49ers did a couple years ago, they just gradually got better and better defensive linemen. I think it's always a good thing to improve your defensive lineman position, even if it's already good. They did sign Mario Addison in the offseason, but I don't think that's enough. I think drafting Gregory Rousseau will really give him the edge to become one of the best edge rushing teams in the NFL.
Next, we have a team who can be described in one image of Patrick Mahomes, basically level with the ground, throwing a football 30 yards and hitting a guy in the helmet. Basically, what I'm talking about is the Kansas City Chiefs are good, but they need O-line help badly. Eric Fisher is out likely for most of next season, if not the entirety of next season, with the massive injury that he got. And the O-line clearly is not good, especially against some of the premier defenses in the league. This team should be winning Super Bowls and should be winning them back to back, especially considering the immense amount of talent they have. Although there's a bit of a defensive concern, their defense is definitely pretty decent for the quality of offense that they are historically. I mean, considering how they sort of limited the Buffalo Bills offense, their defense is okay. They need help in the O-line, and the best prospect in the O-line right now is Jalen Mayfield. Some people have Tevin Jenkins ranked a bit ahead of him, but I think it just came down to they look quite similar. Maybe if they look quite similar and one is from Michigan and one is from Oklahoma State, and you're comparing prospects, and no, we're not talking about Cade Cunningham in the NBA, we're talking about the NFL, it has to be Jalen Mayfield.
All right, next up we have the Bucs, the team that won the Super Bowl. And I know they should maybe take a receiver because they have a few receivers that are going into free agency. But I actually think they should get one more D-line to kind of complete that amazing D-line that they already have. And that's going to be Christian Barmore. Now, even though he is a defensive tackle, he does have the ability to play 3-4 defensive end as well. And frankly, William Golston isn't really amazing. Like, he only had 3 sacks. But I think a defensive line consisting of Vita Vea, Ndamukong Suh, Christian Barmore, who's one of the best defensive linemen in the draft, and then JPP and Shaq Barrett rushing off the edge. That's just going to be like a crazy defensive line. So I think it would just be a great fit for them.
Do you think we made the right pick for your favorite team? You can comment below. But this is it for this episode of Hike and Spike. If you liked it, like. If you didn't, leave a comment as to why. And don't forget to subscribe. This is the Benchwarmers, and we're signing off. See ya.